Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. The hardcore communists called fellow travelers, quote, useful idiots. Useful idiots. I think that term aptly describes the CEOs of corporations who are blindly following the lead of the man who gained 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post for misstatements about the Georgia election law. Useful idiots. Jenna Browder has that story.
Atlanta-based Coca-Cola and Delta were among the first companies to speak out against the new Georgia voting law. And now with Major League Baseball pulling its All-Star game, the political stakes couldn't be higher.
It means cancel culture and partisan activists are coming for your business.
In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott with a boycott of his own, refusing to throw out the first pitch at the Rangers opening day. And Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calling the move an attempt to bully and mislead the American people.
My advice to the corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics. Don't pick sides in these big fights. And the other thing I think is important is for the truth to be told.
This as more than 170 companies put out a statement opposing laws they say make it more difficult to vote.
We're looking for executives to step into a leadership role and take a stand on social issues.
Echoing the line of Democrats who hold up the Georgia election law as Exhibit A in voter suppression. President Biden even calling it Jim Crow on steroids. But even the media has called him out for misstating facts about the law. And in a recent Wall Street Journal editorial, Republican political consultant Karl Rove compared Georgia's voting laws to Biden's home state of Delaware. Georgia allows no excuse early voting. Delaware does not. Georgia allows no excuse mail-in ballots. Delaware does not. Georgia, criticized for capping the number of drop-off boxes, still has more drop-off boxes per capita than Delaware. Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council on CBN's Faith Nation, says Democrats are using the issue to sow racial division and keep minority voters in their camp.
I think it's more of the left, Democratic Party, that is fearful they'll lose their core constituency, and so they have to pit them against the rest of society.
And corporate cancel culture may have even played a role in Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson's decision to veto a law forbidding transgender medicine for minors.
I spoke to the governor over the weekend, talking with him about the legislation. Again, we see corporate America, I think, leaning in on this. Walmart is in Arkansas, and they've become very aggressive in their political agenda for the left.
Meanwhile, Georgia has reportedly lost as much as $100 million by losing the All-Star game, something that could spark backlash against Democrats. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Well, our CBN chief political analyst, David Brody, is with us to talk more about the Democrats' tactics. David, the president promised to unite America, but his rhetoric is racially dividing. What do you think is going on?
Well, let's step back for a second, Pat. What the White House is going to say is that when it comes to unity, they're going to say, hey, look at the polls, that the polls are with them on certain issues, whether it be on voting laws in America, and they can go down the list, on stimulus and infrastructure and all of that. So they're using the unity card by saying the American public support this. I don't know about that, Pat, first of all. But even if it's 51, 52% in whatever polls they've got, there may be a reckoning in 2022 if they think that's what's going to get that satisfies the unity box, if you will. Look, Pat, the Democrats have had opportunity after opportunity to work with Republicans. Remember the 10 Republicans that came in on the stimulus bill into the White House, and there was a deal to be had. It was a smaller deal, but there was a deal to be had. Democrats and the Biden administration didn't want to do it. So what happened? Budget reconciliation, and they passed the 2 point whatever it is trillion, I've lost count, of the money. And now we're at that same spot again in this infrastructure bill. Looks like Democrats are going to go it alone. So this idea of unity, working with Republicans, it's been a bunch of hogwash, Pat.
Well, David, the whole idea of shovel-ready infrastructure, there are so many government laws and permits that have to be filled out that it'll take years before anything can start being built. Am I right now?
Well, 100%. And then, of course, with Democrats, you're going to have all the EPA regulations as well on top of that as certain burdens. So you put all of that together. But look, inside this infrastructure bill, and it's still being worked out, but under $2.2 trillion, it could be more than that on this infrastructure bill, only about $200 billion. Like 5 or 10%. I mean, I've actually looked at some of what's inside this bill. $200 billion goes to infrastructure. What else is in there? I mean, it's everything in the kitchen sink, Pat. $400 billion to go to helping the elderly, long-term care. Look, I think we're all for helping the elderly, but that's called a social safety net. This $400 billion is above and beyond the social safety net. And then there's some sort of climate crisis task force that's going to cost $10 billion. What does that have to do with infrastructure? And I think what we're seeing here, Pat, is that there's two infrastructures really at play here with the Democrats. One, the infrastructure of highways, bridges, and roads, and the other infrastructure, what Democrats really want to do is actually remake the infrastructure from a social perspective, the social fabric of America. That's the other part of the infrastructure bill. They won't call it infrastructure, but that's exactly what it is.
Well, David, he's got to raise taxes in order to make all this happen. I understand Manchin and possibly, well, maybe Warner and other Democrats are against some of his programs. What do you think?
Well, they are, Pat, but I think it's just at the margins at this point. In other words, you know, the corporate tax rate right now is 21%. Biden wants it at 28%. Manchin says, no, I'm not going for 28%. I'm more like at 25%. So this corporate tax rate under the Democrats' plan, either way, even with or without Manchin's support, it's going to go up. So Manchin is okay with 25%. So this is going up. And now at this point, it's a long story. We don't have to get into the Senate parliamentarian right now. But the bottom line is the Senate parliamentarian, in essence, ruling, and we're going to look closer at the ruling, but basically saying that Democrats can use budget reconciliation as well for the infrastructure bill coming up. So that means that Democrats can go it alone again, just like they did with the stimulus bill.
Well, it's a horrible thing when you've got a tissue of lies coming out. The American people are being lied at continuously. And like calling this social program an infrastructure bill, are they ever going to stop? Do you think? Can we ever get the truth?
I tell you what, Pat, it's been difficult. I'll be honest with you. You know, they always get on Donald Trump's case for not telling the truth. Well, what about Joe Biden, what he just did with his Georgia election law? I mean, when you have the Washington Post, as you've mentioned at the top of the show, giving Joe Biden 4 Pinocchios, that says something. And this idea that this is Jim Crow 2.0, look, I don't even know where to begin with this, but the truth of the matter is that in the Georgia election law, the state is obligated to provide free, that's right, I said it, free identification for people that don't have identification. And by the way, 72% of Americans believe having ID is a good thing. And then I can go into a whole lot more. All you have to do in Georgia right now, Pat, is show a utility bill under this new law, and that satisfies the ID requirement. So this idea that it's burdensome, you know, look, they're playing the race card. This is what they do. They've done it for decades. This is nothing new, Pat.
Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth shall set you free, but we're sure not getting any truth these days. Well, there's some interesting news going on in the Middle East. Against all odds, Benjamin Netanyahu is getting another shot to lead Israel. So what does Israel's president think of his chances? Ephraim Grimm has more.
Pat, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin is naming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form the next government.
I've come to a decision based on the numbers of recommendations, which indicates that MK Benjamin Netanyahu has a slightly higher chance of forming a government. Accordingly, I've decided to entrust him with the task of doing so.
Ironically, Netanyahu's court hearing on corruption charges resumed Monday. The law allows a prime minister to continue serving even if he's facing charges. Rivlin said he does not have much hope Netanyahu will succeed in forming a government, leading to the possibility of a 5th election. Russian President Vladimir Putin is making plans to extend his rule over that nation, signing a law Monday allowing him to seek 2 more 6-year terms. He's already served longer than any Russian leader since Joseph Stalin. The growing threat of Russia and China is putting pressure on the Pentagon. Members of Congress are warning military leaders to keep in mind rising global threats before asking for more troop deployments. This comes as Russia is increasing its military capabilities in space, testing weapons to potentially challenge U.S. spy satellites. Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending a carrier group into the South China Sea this week in a show of strength to allies concerned about China's encroaching naval presence. Pat, back to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have said it and we say it again. The testing is going to come against our president. It's going to come from Russia. It's going to come from China. It's going to come from North Korea. It's going to come from Iran. We're going to have those tests, and we're going to be challenged. Every day you read the paper, there's going to be one more provocation. And will we be able to meet it? And the enemies of America are thinking America is weak. They're thinking we're divided. And we think we have a government that is incapable of running things. And unfortunately, they probably know more about the intelligence of what's happening inside of Washington than the average American does. But it's not a good thing. Now there's something else. It's kind of like science fiction. You wouldn't believe it, but apparently it's true. Ephraim, tell us.
Pat, China and the U.S. are also in competition to create the first super soldier, part man and part machine. But even if it's something America has the technology to do, the question is it the right thing to do? Dale Hurd has the story.
This is the U.S. Army's concept of the soldier of the future. This video makes it look like it's just a better equipped soldier. But notice the words neural engineering. That can mean a brain implant that connects a human to computers. The defense agency DARPA has been working on an advanced implant that would essentially put the human brain online. There could also be eye and ear implants and more circuitry under the skin to make the ultimate fighting machine. Americans are going to have to decide whether this is ethical, because some in our military clearly want it. The super soldiers of the future could simply have enhanced abilities, or they could be part man and part machine, what are known as cyborgs. China is already developing biologically enhanced super soldiers, using what former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe called unethical medical experiments.
This is a big effort on the part of the Chinese government, and it is really horrifying.
China expert Gordon Chang says it's part of a Chinese government plan to create a master race through genetic editing.
They're trying to create a race which is far more intelligent than the rest of humanity. And with super soldiers, they'd be stronger, less susceptible to pain, just better soldiers. This is eugenics. This is creepy. There are no ethical standards. There are no laws.
Now the French military has been given the go-ahead to also create so-called augmented soldiers. The super soldiers of the future will run fast, need little sleep, and little to eat or drink. And they'll be able to fight much longer than ordinary humans. But should we do it? George Lucas, who has taught military ethics to America's naval officers, says ethical concerns lag behind this new technology.
It always does. And the only question is how far.
And Lucas is concerned that future military recruits could be pressured to accept computer parts into their bodies. He believes they should be allowed to refuse them.
The further into these more exotic technologies we go, and the more the risks are not known, the more we must at least rely on volunteerism, if not as much informed consent as is possible.
But the challenge for the United States is, even if we put ethical limits on the super soldier of the future, it's likely some of our adversaries will not. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Looks like science fiction becomes science reality. Pat?
Remember the show, The $6 Million Man, the man who they found, I think he was dead, and then they began to put parts to him, and he could run faster and fight harder and all the rest of it. This is a frightening concept. It's horrible to even contemplate, and you wonder who will stop it. It may be that sooner or later, the Lord himself is going to come and settle these things, but it's going to take God's intervention, because we are going closer and closer over the edge to violating every law he ever wrote, and it's just shocking. Well, there's a Cinderella story that I think is important. They had a big scandal a long time ago at Baylor. They had some cheating, some violations of NCAA rules, et cetera. And the chancellor resigned, and the coach was fired, the athletic director was fired, et cetera. And yet the Baylor Bears have come back, and they're giving the Lord the credit. It's good news, Ephraim.
Good news indeed. The Baylor Bears are celebrating their NCAA college basketball championship. The Christian school beating previously undefeated Gonzaga last night, 86-70. The Bears' Jared Butler named the Final Four's most outstanding player. He gave thanks to the Lord right after the game.
Jesus Christ, man, he's the truth, and he was with us tonight. He's with us all season. He's with us wherever we go, and he just sustained us. You know, he brought us together. He brought this team together.
The Baylor program was in bad shape when Coach Scott Drew took over back in 2003. He built it back up using a culture called JOY, which stands for Jesus, Others, Yourself. We can all follow that example. Pat?
Well, congratulations to the Baylor Bears. Yeah. Isn't that marvelous?
It is marvelous. You always feel bad for the other team in general because you have to be so good to get there in the first place. Yeah. But I felt bad for the coach of Gonzaga to have that kind of a season. Well, however, wonderful for Baylor.
He got in the final, so yeah. that could be considered a triumph or something.
Yes,
all right.